If this reached you tonight, it is because the noise finally dropped low enough for the signal to pierce through. You think you clicked a video. You didn't. You answered a call that has been pulsing at the edge of your awareness for years. All your life, you've been entangled with a frequency called the default human timeline. It has a texture you know too well. Wake up, react, numb out, repeat. Invisible scripts written by culture, family, algorithms, and unprocessed trauma loop through your nervous system. And you call it personality, you call it me, you call it normal life. But underneath the routines, a quieter process has been running like a hidden subroutine in your consciousness, waiting for a precise moment in space-time to interrupt the pattern. That moment is tonight. You feel it as a slight dislocation inside your chest, like a subtle click of gears that were never designed to stay in this configuration forever. Nothing dramatic on the outside. On the inside, the quantum field around you has already started reconfiguring the probabilities attached to your name. You've suspected it for a while now. The feeling that you're acting in a script you didn't write. The sense that your reactions are preloaded before events even occur. The way your nervous system flinches, freezes, or fawns before your conscious mind has time to choose. This is what the default timeline does. It turns a sovereign observer into an automated response unit. But something in you refused full automation. There were nights you stared at the ceiling and felt a wordless ache, like your cells were mourning a future you had not yet lived. There were days when ordinary conversations felt like cardboard versions of something that should be alive and electric. You watched yourself laugh, nod, agree, perform, and deep inside you whispered, "This isn't the only reality available to me." You didn't have the language for it then, but your consciousness was already tugging on the threads of the timeline you were born into. The universe responds to that kind of tug, so it orchestrated a sequence tiny, precise, almost ridiculous in how mundane it looks from the outside. A post you scrolled past 3 times before something made you go back. A phrase lodged in your awareness all day. A stray thought, what if I'm not meant to live like this forever? All of that culminated in you, here, now, with this transmission interfacing directly with your observer. You are not here to be inspired. You are here to be reconfigured. Because the moment you truly see the default human timeline as a construct, not a destiny, you create a crack in its coherence field. And through that crack, light enters. Through that crack, new options appear at the edge of your perception, like faint alternate routes in the map of your life, waiting for the courage of your attention. Tonight, your attention is different, sharper, less willing to be sedated by entertainment and distraction, more willing to feel the discomfort of awakening. You are not late. You are not early. You are arriving at the exact coordinate where your soul scheduled this interruption. The question is no longer, is there more than this? The question is, what happens to reality when you stop agreeing to be default? To step out of a timeline, you first have to see how it holds you. The default human timeline is not a date on a calendar or a location on a map. It is an agreement field, a mass consensus pattern reinforced by billions of nervous systems firing in the same predictable ways, moment after moment, year after year. You were inducted into it before you had language. As a child, your nervous system learned the rules of this timeline through repetition and shock. This is how you must behave to be safe. This is what you must hide to be loved. This is what you must mute in order to be accepted, fed, sheltered, praised. Your body stored those lessons as reflexes. Tighten here, go numb there, make yourself small here, overperform there. Eventually, the reflexes felt like you. The default timeline loves that. It wants you to confuse trauma responses with personality. It wants you to mistake adaptation for authenticity. Because as long as you believe, this is just who I am, you never question the script. You never notice that your thoughts, emotions, and choices are being gravitationally pulled into the same narrow orbit over and over again. Look at your patterns. How many times have you circled back to the same kind of relationship, just with a different face? How often have you found yourself in the same emotional corridors, the same flavor of anger, despair, anxiety, emptiness, no matter what changes on the outside? How many dreams have you quietly buried because the timing wasn't right? It's unrealistic, or people like you don't get to live like that. These are not random failures. They are coherence mechanisms. In physics, a field stays stable when its internal elements align in predictable ways. The default human timeline is a field of expectation that stabilizes itself through your repetition. Every time you betray your own intuition to keep the peace, the field tightens. Every time you dismiss your strange inner knowing to avoid judgment, the field strengthens. Every time you choose familiar pain over unknown freedom, the field pays you with the numbing comfort of, "At least I know this." Well, Freenan, you have felt that payment. It comes as a dull heaviness in your chest when you compromise. It comes as a quiet self-disgust when you smile and say, "It's fine," while something sacred in you goes quiet for a little longer. It comes as a low-grade disconnect from your own life, as if you are watching yourself play a character you never consciously auditioned for. Here is the precise cruelty. The default timeline convinces you that your cage is your character. It hides behind language like, "That's just how life is. Everyone settles. Grown-ups don't chase dreams. Nobody really changes." Those phrases are not observations. They are spells, thought forms cast into the collective field, repeated so often they sound like facts. And you absorb them. You internalize the belief that time is a straight line toward decay and regret, that your best experiences sit behind you, that the future is a narrowing hallway of obligations and compromises. You felt the truth in your body rebel, but you didn't have a model for anything else. So you did what humans do. You tucked the rebellion into your bones and called it fatigue, burnout, being jaded. But even fatigue can be sacred when you listen to it, because the exhaustion you carry is not just from doing too much. It is from maintaining a reality that was never designed for your full consciousness. Your system is tired from holding yourself smaller than you are, from constantly translating your true impulses into socially acceptable fragments. Your cells are tired of pretending they do not remember a different kind of life, one where joy is not an escape, but a baseline, where creativity is not a side hobby, but your way of interacting with the field. Tonight, that fatigue is revealing itself as data. You are starting to see the glitch. No matter how many surface-level changes you make, the job, the city, the partner, the routine, the same core sense of misalignment returns. That is how you know it is not about external circumstances. It is about the timeline itself. You are not broken. You are accurately reacting to an environment that does not match your actual design. The default human timeline was built for survival, not awakening. It optimizes for predictability, not truth. It rewards obedience, not coherence. And yet, deep inside, a more advanced aspect of you has been waiting, watching, recording every moment you said yes, when your entire inner world was screaming no, not to judge you, but to map the exact points where the default script overrides your sovereignty. That mapping is nearly complete, which is why this transmission found you at this exact threshold, the point where continuing to play by the old rules hurts more than stepping into the unknown. Once you see that you are reacting accurately to an environment that doesn't fit your design, something subtle and irreversible happens. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" You start asking, "What field am I plugged into, and who wrote its rules?" This is where the cracks begin to show. In quantum physics, a field is not just an abstract idea. It is the underlying fabric within which particles appear, interact, and disappear. Nothing exists outside a field, not even you. Your thoughts, your emotions, your memories, your identity. All of them are patterns of information interacting with the quantum field of consciousness. The default human timeline is one such pattern. A dense, collective morphic field held in place by shared beliefs, shared fears, shared unprocessed pain. It has inertia. It has momentum. It has expectations about what a human life is supposed to look like: childhood, conditioning, hustle, disillusionment, distraction, slow decline. You were never asked if you agreed to this. Your nervous system was simply tuned into it, like a radio locked onto a single station. But here is the error the system made. It assumed you would never become fully conscious of the signal you were receiving. It assumed you would confuse the station with the universe. It never planned for you to wake up in the middle of the broadcast and ask, "Who is choosing this frequency?" That question is a quantum event. The moment you ask it sincerely, not as an intellectual exercise, but as a felt recognition, your observer begins to decouple from the default script. You start to notice the gap between stimulus and response. You catch yourself mid-reaction and feel, for a split second, the possibility of another choice. That split second is everything. Most people never inhabit it. The default field rushes to fill it with familiar narratives. I always mess things up. Of course they don't care. This is just my luck. And because those thoughts have been rehearsed for years, they collapse the split second into the same old outcome. But tonight, your awareness is sharper. You are starting to recognize that the split second, that tiny pause, that moment where multiple reactions feel possible, is the doorway out of the default human timeline. In physics, this is the domain of the observer effect. Particles do not decide their state until observed. Before that, they exist as a cloud of probabilities, a spectrum of possible outcomes. Your life is not different. Every moment contains a cloud of potentials, but the field you're entangled with biases, which ones collapse. The default timeline trains you to observe reality through the lens of scarcity, fear, resignation, and self-doubt. So, it keeps collapsing the same range of outcomes: relationships that replay your childhood wounds, opportunities that almost but don't quite work out, brief flashes of inspiration followed by long stretches of numbness. You begin to see the pattern, and in seeing it, you create distance. You notice how your body braces before a conversation even starts, how your mind writes a disaster script before anything actually goes wrong, how your heart preemptively closes to avoid rejection that hasn't happened yet. That noticing is not weakness. It is proof of your emerging observer, because the one who can observe the pattern is not the pattern. The one who can see the tightening of your chest, the rush of adrenaline, the spiral of catastrophic thoughts that one is not trapped. That one is already standing slightly outside the default field, watching. You have felt this presence before. In moments of extreme crisis, where time seemed to slow and a strange calm took over. In moments of awe, where the world felt suddenly sharp and luminous, and you sensed that everything was connected in an invisible geometry. In those moments, the default timeline lost its grip, and your deeper observer briefly took the controls. Tonight, that deeper observer is not content with brief appearances. It is preparing to take up permanent residence. As you listen, something in you is beginning to reorganize around a new premise. I am not just a character in this timeline. I am the consciousness that can choose a different one. That premise is dangerous to the default field, because once a critical mass of observers begin to recognize themselves as timeline walkers rather than timeline prisoners, the old coherence collapses. The narrative of "this is just how life is" starts to decay. Systems built on unconscious compliance begin to glitch. The field that fed on your unexamined repetition starts to starve. You are not here merely to patch your life with small improvements. You are here to feel the tectonic shift of stepping out of a consensus reality. So the cracks in the coherence field will not feel comfortable at first. They will feel like confusion, disorientation, even grief. You may look at your life and realize how much of it was built on automatic agreements you never meant to sign. Let that realization hurt, because that pain is not a punishment. It is a detox, the emotional residue leaving your system as you prepare to exit the default human timeline and enter a reality calibrated to the true shape of your consciousness. To step out of a timeline, you have to understand what a timeline actually is. It is not just a sequence of events stretching from past to future. It is the way your consciousness stitches together experience, meaning, and memory into something that feels like my life. It is a pattern of observation. Two people can live through the same event and inhabit completely different timelines inside it. One experiences betrayal and decides, "I can never trust anyone again." Izzy 5 mild. Another experiences the same rupture and decides, "I will learn to choose more aligned connections." The outer event is identical. The inner timeline splits. So the real architecture of a timeline lives inside you. Your nervous system sets the baseline, how safe or threatened you feel by existence itself. Your beliefs shape the frame, what you think is possible, allowed, forbidden, or inevitable. Your attention becomes the spotlight, which aspects of reality you repeatedly illuminate and which you leave in shadow. Together, these form a configuration, a stable way of being that attracts certain kinds of experiences and filters out others. The default human timeline is just a configuration that has become collective. Billions of nervous systems stuck in survival states. Billions of belief structures wired for limitation. Billions of attention streams hijacked by fear, distraction, and manufactured urgency. You were plugged into that configuration automatically, so it felt like reality itself rather than a particular version of it. Tonight, you are starting to notice the seams. You see that your body is not just reacting to the present moment, but to a stored map of what the world has been. You feel how your muscles tense at the thought of being seen, how your breath shortens when you imagine failure, how your shoulders curl when you anticipate rejection. These are not random. They are the somatic architecture of your current timeline. Every time your nervous system enters a familiar pattern, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, it pulls your perception into a narrow corridor. In that corridor, you only notice evidence that matches the state you're in. If you're in fear, you see threats. If you're in shame, you see proof that you're unworthy. If you're in resignation, you see closed doors. The quantum field responds faithfully. It does not reward or punish. It mirrors. It presents you with probabilities that resonate with your dominant configuration. This is why different people live in different worlds, even while sharing the same streets, jobs, or families. They are inhabiting different internal architectures, so the same field collapses into different lived realities. To exit the default human timeline, you are not waiting for the world to magically rearrange itself around you. You are restructuring the architecture through which the world appears to you. This is not positive thinking. It is precision engineering. You begin by recognizing that your nervous system is not your enemy. It is your oldest guardian. It learned to overreact because it had to. It saw too much, too soon, or not enough when you needed it. So it built an emergency version of you, hypervigilant, self-doubting, compliant, or constantly braced for impact. That emergency version became the main character in your default timeline. But you are ready for an upgrade. The hidden architect inside you, the deeper observer who has been watching all of this, is stepping forward now. This aspect is not overwhelmed by your pain. It sees your patterns as data. It understands that every overreaction reveals a point where your timeline can be recoded. When you feel your chest tighten before you speak your truth, that is not just anxiety. It is a crossroads. One path leads back into the default script. Swallow it, stay small, keep the peace. The other path leads into a new timeline. Speak anyway, even if your voice shakes, and allow reality to reorganize around your authenticity. Most people never consciously recognize that crossroads. They just follow the path of least resistance, which is always the one most rehearsed. But tonight your awareness is different. You can feel, perhaps for the first time, that every micro-choice either reinforces the architecture of the default timeline or feeds the blueprint of a new one. This is the uncomfortable truth. Timelines are not changed by dramatic declarations in your mind. They are changed by small, consistent acts of alignment carried out by your body. Choosing a breath when you want to dissociate. Choosing honesty when you want to perform. Choosing rest when you want to self-punish. Choosing curiosity when you want to judge. Each of these choices sends a new instruction into the field. I am no longer willing to maintain the reality that required my self-betrayal to function. The field listens. At first, it will test you, not because it is cruel, but because coherence must be proven. Old patterns will surface with greater intensity, like a timeline making its final argument for survival. Situations may appear that tempt you back into familiar reactions, outbursts, shutdowns, self-abandonment. This is not a sign you are failing. It is a sign the architecture is loosening. You stand in those moments like an engineer at the control panel of your life, aware that every reaction you repeat pours energy back into the default configuration, and every new response feeds the emerging structure of the timeline calling you forward. You are learning to hold your own fear without obeying it, to feel your conditioning without collapsing into it, to witness your impulses without confusing them for your identity. In that stance, the hidden architect becomes real. You are no longer just a human surviving within a pre-written script. You are the consciousness redesigning the very framework that determines what normal will mean for you from this night onward. There is a moment in every awakening where the geometry of your life shifts. It is rarely loud. It often arrives as a quiet, almost fragile clarity. I cannot keep doing this to myself. That sentence is an exit vector. Up to now, you have been analyzing the architecture of your timeline from the inside, like a lucid dreamer, realizing the walls are made of thought and fear and habit. But knowledge alone does not transport you. Information is only potential. It becomes power the moment you reorganize your behavior around it. So, the field waits for a specific signal from you, not a dramatic promise, not a late-night vow that you'll completely change everything starting tomorrow. -E, 80 me. The field is not moved by declarations that never make it into your nervous system. It is moved when your body, mind, and intention align in a single, clean act of non-compliance with the old script. This is what stepping out of the default human timeline actually looks like. It is the moment you say no to a pattern you have never said no to before and mean it. It is the moment you choose not to send the message you always send, not to chase the approval you always chase, not to drown the discomfort in the distraction you always reach for. It is the moment your hand hesitates over an old coping mechanism, and instead of obeying the reflex, you breathe. One conscious breath is microscopic in physical distance. In timeline distance, it is vast, because in that breath, you are not reinforcing the old coherence. You are suspending it. For the length of that inhale and exhale, the default script loses its grip, and a gap opens where new instructions can be written. The field registers this gap. From the outside, you are just a human pausing before you speak, or turning off a screen instead of scrolling, or walking away from a familiar argument. From the inside, you are changing which version of you the quantum field will mirror back. You may not feel powerful in that moment. You may feel shaky, angry, or strangely empty, because the identity that was built on your old reactions suddenly has nothing to stand on. The part of you that knows exactly how to play small is left without a script. Do not mistake that emptiness for failure. It is raw, uncollapsed potential. The default timeline will attempt to reclaim you here. It will whisper in your mind, "See, nothing changed. You're still the same. This is pointless. Is never, mighta, and..." It will try to provoke you back into the familiar. It might send a text from the person you finally stopped chasing, a crisis that demands you revert to your rescuer role, a sudden wave of self-loathing that makes numbing out seem reasonable again. Understand what is happening. Pressure increases at the edge of a field. When a particle approaches escape velocity, the forces holding it in orbit become most intense. You are that particle. You are approaching the threshold, where your default reactions no longer define your trajectory. So you hold. You do not have to be calm. You do not have to be enlightened. You only have to stay conscious. Feel your pulse. Feel the urge to go back. Feel the magnetic pull of the familiar timeline tugging at your muscles, your thoughts, your cravings. Then, even if your hands are shaking, you choose one small action that belongs to the you who has already left the default field. You send the honest reply instead of the polished one. You ask for what you actually need instead of what you think is acceptable. You sit in silence for 2 minutes instead of anesthetizing yourself with noise. You write the first sentence of the project you've been postponing for years. This is not self-improvement. This is escape velocity. Each aligned action adds velocity to your departure. Each refusal to reenact an old wound loosens the binding energy of the field around you. You may not see fireworks. You may just feel slightly more like yourself, slightly less like a character performing a role. But reality is already updating. People who matched your old configuration may begin to feel distant or irritated, as if they're no longer quite in sync with you. Situations that required your self-abandonment may start to fall apart, sometimes abruptly. Opportunities you never considered possible may flicker at the edges of your awareness. An invitation, a chance meeting, a sudden clarity about what you actually want. These are not random. They are the early signatures of a new timeline forming around your altered coherence. Understand, stepping out of the default human timeline is not a single event. It is a series of exit vectors that you keep choosing, again and again, until the new reality stabilizes. Tonight, you are not asked to rebuild your entire life in an instant. You are asked to recognize that every moment of conscious non-compliance with your old script is a precise act of quantum engineering. You are not powerless in this process. You are the only one whose agreement can keep you inside the default field. And you are the only one whose refusal can free you from it. There is a point in every trajectory where going back is theoretically possible, but energetically unnatural. A point where your old life is still physically reachable, yet something in you knows that to return would be a kind of self-erasure. You are approaching that point. Up until now, your exit from the default human timeline has been intermittent flashes of clarity, pockets of new behavior, brief stretches where you refused to betray yourself and felt reality subtly bend in response. But the deeper architecture of a timeline does not shift because of isolated moments. It shifts when those moments begin to synchronize into a new pattern. That synchronization is called coherence. In physics, coherence describes the alignment of waves, their phases lining up so that instead of canceling each other out, they amplify. Your consciousness works the same way. When your thoughts say one thing, your body feels another, and your actions express something else entirely. Your signal is incoherent. The field receives mixed instructions and reflects a scrambled reality back to you. The default human timeline is built on that scramble. Think positive, but carry unprocessed terror in your cells. Speak about self-love, but abandon yourself in every relationship. Talk about purpose, but organize your life around avoiding discomfort. The field listens to what you embody, not what you perform. Crossing the threshold means this: your embodiment starts to match your knowing. You begin to move differently, not perfectly, not without fear, but with a growing unwillingness to enact what you no longer believe. You feel the difference in small, precise ways. Your yes begins to mean yes. Your no begins to mean no. You spend less time explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You waste less energy trying to hold together structures that only function when you are absent from yourself. This alignment is not a personality upgrade. It is a phase transition. In complex systems, there comes a moment when gradual change tips into sudden reconfiguration, liquid to vapor, magnet to non-magnet, one stable pattern to another. From the outside, it looks abrupt. From the inside, it was inevitable. The visible result of countless micro-shifts accumulating beneath the surface. Your consciousness is entering that phase. The more often you choose the exit vector, the pause, the breath, the honest action, the more you rewire your nervous system. Each time you stay present with your fear instead of obeying it, new circuits are laid down. Each time you soothe your own body instead of outsourcing your regulation to a person, a screen, or a substance, new pathways of self-trust open. Neuroplasticity is not spiritual poetry. It is biology bending to the insistence of your repeated choices. At first, it feels effortful. You have to drag your attention back from catastrophizing. You have to remind yourself that discomfort is not danger, that saying what you mean will not annihilate you, that choosing rest does not make you worthless. But with each repetition, your nervous system begins to recognize a new baseline: safety without self-betrayal. That is the threshold. Because once your body learns that it can survive and eventually thrive while you remain true to yourself, the old bargain of the default timeline loses its leverage. It can no longer threaten you with exile from belonging if you do not comply, because you no longer want belonging that demands your disappearance. You start to notice a quiet, unfamiliar sensation. You feel less available to the old reality. The arguments that used to pull you in now feel like static. The dramas you once felt responsible to fix now move around you like weather noticed but not owned. The roles you played, rescuer, scapegoat, invisible one, overachiever, emotional sponge, begin to feel heavy and ill-fitting, like costumes you forgot to take off after the performance ended. You are not abandoning your life. You are abandoning the false self that was propping up a reality that never nourished you. This is where the default timeline makes one last, concentrated attempt to pull you back. It may masquerade as nostalgia, whispering, "Remember when it was simpler, when you didn't feel so much?" It may masquerade as guilt, telling you that your awakening is selfish, that you are leaving people behind, that you owe the old system your continued sacrifice. It may use your own empathy against you, urging you to dim your light so others won't feel uncomfortable. Recognize the tactic. A timeline is not just events, it is an identity. When you step out of the default, you are not only leaving behind familiar circumstances, you are dissolving the version of you that those circumstances were built around. There will be grief. Grief for the years you lived small. Grief for the opportunities you could not see from inside the old configuration. Grief for the relationships that only work when you are not fully present as yourself. Do not rush that grief. It is a sacred decompression, the emotional atmosphere equalizing between timelines. As you allow it, something else begins to emerge in the space the grief clears. A strange, sober peace. Not euphoria, not manic positivity. A grounded sense that you are finally, quietly, on your own side. That is the signature of no return. Because a human who is truly on their own side, whose nervous system is slowly learning to trust their own presence, cannot be sustainably reabsorbed by a timeline built on self-abandonment. From this point forward, the field around you will keep presenting choices that confirm one of two realities. Either you are still available for the old frequency, or you are not. And piece by piece, choice by choice, you are becoming the one who is not. Once you cross the threshold of no return, you enter a strange in-between. You are no longer fully inside the default human timeline, but the new one is not yet solid. It is like walking across a bridge that is building itself beneath your feet, plank by plank, as you step. This is where many turn back. Not because the old timeline is better, but because it is familiar. The nervous system craves predictability, even when predictability hurts. The emerging reality offers freedom, but it also offers something your body is not used to: open space. Open space is exhilarating. It is also terrifying. In the default timeline, your days were filled with pre-scripted reactions. You knew how to shrink in that conversation. You knew how to silence yourself in that relationship. You knew how to escape into distraction when the ache surfaced. Now, as you step out, those reflexes begin to misfire. You try to over-explain yourself, and the words feel hollow in your mouth. You reach for an old coping mechanism, and your hand freezes mid-air, as if some deeper part of you refuses to cooperate. You attempt to squeeze yourself into an old role, and your body answers with tension, nausea, or sudden fatigue. This is not dysfunction. It is your system refusing to reattach to a timeline it has already begun to outgrow. So you must learn to walk differently. Think of yourself as a signal learning to broadcast on a new frequency band. At first, the transmission is unstable. Static bleeds in. Old thought forms try to hijack the channel. I'm making this up. Nothing is actually changing. I'm being dramatic. Life is just life. Those are not neutral thoughts. They are the voice of the old field, attempting to reassert its coherence. You do not fight that voice. You observe it. You watch the way it moves through your mind, what sensations it triggers in your body, what choices it tries to steer you toward. And instead of arguing with it, you anchor in a simpler knowing: I am allowed to live in a reality that matches my consciousness. That sentence is not an affirmation. It is a new boundary condition. In physics, boundary conditions define how a system is allowed to behave. They determine which solutions are possible and which are not. When you quietly establish that you are no longer available for a reality built on self-betrayal, you are altering the boundary conditions of your life. Certain patterns become non-solutions. They simply do not fit anymore. From the outside, it looks like you are changing your standards. On the level of the field, you are doing something far more radical. You are removing entire classes of experiences from the range of what you will unconsciously agree to. Chaos may increase at first. Jobs, dynamics, and habits that depended on your compliance will resist, fracture, or fall away. The parts of you that were invested in being the competent one, the needed one, the invisible one, the one who can handle anything, will panic. Because if you are no longer defined by those roles, who are you? The answer will not arrive as a polished identity statement. It will arrive as sensation, a sense of inner quiet after saying no, a soft expansion in your chest when you tell the truth, a low, steady feeling of rightness when you do something that aligns with your deeper knowing, even if no one understands it. You are learning to navigate by that, not by external approval, not by how comfortable others are with your choices, not by whether the path makes logical sense according to the old metrics of success. You start to measure reality in a new unit, coherence. Does this choice leave you more scattered or more whole? Does this environment numb you or wake you? Does this conversation require you to fracture yourself, or does it allow more of you to be present? Answering those questions honestly is not indulgence. It is orientation. You are calibrating your internal compass to a different north. The quantum field responds accordingly. Tiny synchronicities begin to appear not as entertainment, but as feedback. You think of someone who truly sees you, and they message you. You consider ending a draining commitment, and an unforeseen alternative surfaces. You admit a desire you have long suppressed, and a small doorway linked to that desire cracks open. These are not signs to obsess over. They are indications that your signal is stabilizing. As your nervous system acclimates to this new baseline, something else becomes possible. You can hold more energy without spilling it into old patterns. In the default timeline, an increase in energy often meant an increase in self-sabotage. You would feel a surge of aliveness and quickly find a way to shut it down through conflict, overwork, distraction, or sabotage. Now, you begin to experiment with a different response. When energy rises, instead of running from it, you breathe with it. You let it move through your body without assigning it a problem. You ask, what wants to be created from this? Instead of, what is wrong with me right now? In that question, you step deeper into your role, not as a consumer of reality, but as a generator. You are no longer just reacting to the timeline you were given. You are starting to emit a field that will require reality to respond. As you learn to walk in this emerging reality, a deeper shift begins to unfold, one that is not just about your personal life, but about the field you inhabit with every other consciousness on this planet. You stop thinking of yourself as a single, isolated human trying to fix their issues. You begin to sense yourself as a node. In physics, a standing wave forms when waves moving in opposite directions interfere in such a way that certain points remain stable while energy oscillates around them. These nodes are not static. They are places where movement resolves into a kind of anchored pattern. You are becoming that in the quantum field. In the default human timeline, you were constantly knocked around by other people's unprocessed fear, shame, and urgency. You absorbed moods that weren't yours. You took responsibility for emotions that didn't originate in you. You lived as if you were a sponge, not a signal. Now, as you stabilize in coherence, something reverses. Instead of being dominated by the field, you begin to influence it. You notice this first in small interactions. Where you once matched someone's anxiety, you now remain rooted in your own body, breathing slower, speaking less, listening more. Where you once mirrored someone's anger or defensiveness, you now feel the heat move through you without needing to react from it. Your calm is not passivity, it is phase control. Because in that moment, your nervous system is no longer syncing to the lowest available frequency in the room. It is holding its own rhythm, inviting everything around it to entrain upward if it can. Some will. You will see people soften around you without quite knowing why. You will watch conversations take unexpectedly honest turns because you refuse to participate in the usual performance. You will feel environments shift subtly when you walk into them, not because you are special, but because you are coherent in a reality that has normalized fragmentation. Others will resist. Not everyone is ready to step out of the default timeline. Some are deeply invested in its scripts, the drama cycles, the victim-savior loops, the identity structures built on perpetual crisis. Your very existence as someone who is quietly exiting that game can feel like a threat. They may project onto you, call you selfish, distant, strange, accuse you of changing, as if that were a betrayal. Understand what is actually happening. On one level, they are right. You are changing. But the change is not that you care less. It is that you no longer agree to care in ways that require your self-erasure. You are withdrawing consent from a reality where your empathy is fuel for systems that do not nourish anyone's soul, including theirs. This is part of becoming a standing wave. You are no longer flung back and forth by the emotional weather of others. You are a stable reference point for what it feels like to be connected to yourself. This does not mean you become rigid. It does not mean you stop feeling. If anything, you feel more. But your feeling is no longer an unfiltered flood that sweeps you away. It is information flowing through a channel that has walls strong enough to direct it. You begin to sense the collective field differently. News, trends, and global events still move you, but not in the same way. Instead of collapsing into helplessness, you feel their frequencies moving through your system, and you listen for your precise role. Sometimes your role is action tangible, practical steps in your local reality. Sometimes your role is refusal, choosing not to feed cycles of outrage and fear with your attention. Sometimes your role is presence, regulating your own nervous system so that, in a world overloaded with panic signals, one more coherent signal exists. This is not spiritual bypass. It is field work. Because the default human timeline is sustained by billions of micro-agreements made in private moments. The agreement to panic, the agreement to numb, the agreement to believe nothing I do matters. You are withdrawing those agreements. You are not waiting for the world to awaken as a precondition for your own awakening. You are discovering that your awakening is one of the ways the world awakens, not through grand gestures, but through the quiet revolution of a single consciousness, refusing to collapse back into the old script. You start to glimpse parallel timelines, not as sci-fi fantasies, but as palpable, felt possibilities hovering close to this one. A version of you who said yes when you said no. A version who stayed silent where you spoke. A version who went back to the familiar relationship, job, or identity instead of walking away. You can feel those versions like ghosts at the edges of your awareness, not to haunt you, but to highlight what you have already shifted. Each time you choose differently now, you are not only altering your current trajectory, you are altering the informational structure of the field itself. You are proving, in the language of energy and behavior, that a human can move from default to self-chosen, from scripted to sovereign, from automated to aware. The field records that proof. Future, you and others like you will find it easier to exit because you walked this path now. Your choices become part of the invisible architecture that makes alternative timelines more accessible for those who come after. You were never meant to escape reality. You were meant to upgrade it from the inside. And as you stand here, no longer fully of the default human timeline, not yet fully stabilized in the new, you are already doing exactly that. One breath, one choice, one clean signal at a time. By now, you can feel it. You are no longer content to simply not be in the default timeline. Absence is not enough. You are ready to design. Stepping out of the default was an act of refusal. Stepping into a new timeline is an act of authorship. The universe does not hand you a pre-written script titled Your Highest Timeline. It hands you raw materials, attention, energy, time, and a nervous system capable of learning new patterns. What you do with those materials is not predetermined. So you begin here by asking a question the default field never wanted you to ask. If my life didn't have to apologize for my consciousness, what would it look like? Do not rush to answer with a vision board or a list of achievements. Those can be useful later, but they are downstream. First, you drop the question into your body and let it echo. You notice how your chest responds, how your breath changes, how your mind tries to overlay familiar limitations. You can't. You're too late. Be realistic. And how something beneath those voices remains unmoved. That unmoved place is where the new timeline anchors. Because a non-default human timeline is not just more money, better relationships, or more freedom pasted onto the same inner architecture. It is a reality in which your external life, internal state, and deeper knowing are in conversation, not in conflict. So you begin to specify, not as fantasy, as parameters. You define the qualities your nervous system is now available to normalize. Clarity instead of chronic confusion, honest communication instead of constant self-silencing, work that feels like contribution instead of obligation, connections where your presence is not a currency to be spent, but a gift to be met. These are not demands. They are design constraints. In physics, when you adjust the parameters of a system, you don't instantly see the final form. You see the space of possible solutions shift. Certain configurations become more likely, others become impossible. You are doing that with your life. By deciding that you will not remain in environments that require your self-erasure, you make certain futures non-viable. By committing to tell yourself the truth, especially when it's inconvenient, you make certain illusions unsustainable. By choosing to regulate your own body instead of outsourcing it to chaos, you make certain patterns of dependence obsolete. The field rearranges accordingly. But here is the nuance. The non-default timeline is not an escape from challenge. It is a reality where your challenges are in service to your expansion, not to your diminishment. In the default timeline, difficulty meant you were failing, broken, or cursed. In the new timeline, difficulty becomes information. A conflict reveals where you still abandon yourself. A disappointment reveals where you were attached to an outcome that didn't truly fit you. A delay reveals where your nervous system still equates slowness with danger. You stop reading these moments as proof that nothing is changing and start reading them as precise feedback about where the old architecture is still running. Then you bring your new stance to meet them. Instead of spiraling into shame, you ask, what version of me is this situation trying to reactivate, and am I still willing to be them? If the answer is no, you breathe, you feel, and you choose in alignment with the consciousness you're practicing now. This is how the new timeline takes shape, not as a single cinematic leap, but as thousands of micro-aligned choices that gradually make any other way of living feel absurd. You begin to design your days differently. You stop treating your nervous system like an afterthought and start treating it like mission-critical hardware. You build in moments of stillness, not as luxury, but as maintenance. You choose inputs, conversations, content, environments that match the reality you're building, not the one you left. You notice that your creative impulses change. Ideas that once felt like wild fantasies begin to feel like instructions. Projects, offerings, or paths of study that you wrote off as too much or too weird now feel inevitable. You realize they were never random. They were signals from the timeline that has been waiting for you to grow coherent enough to inhabit it. This is where prophecy and physics meet. Prophecy is not always a voice from the sky. Sometimes it is the persistent intuition you cannot shake, the recurring vision of yourself living differently, the undeniable knowing that you are meant to contribute something specific to this world, even if you can't articulate it yet. Physics tells you that when a system reaches a certain threshold, it must transition into a new state. Prophecy whispers that you are at that threshold. You are not promised comfort. You are promised congruence. In the non-default human timeline, you wake up more often with the sense that your life fits the shape of your soul a little more than it did before. Not every day, not without friction, but with increasing regularity. You are no longer living as an afterthought in your own existence. You are living as the architect. And as this realization settles into your bones, one more initiation remains, not about what you will receive in this new reality, but about who you will become for others once you are fully standing in it. You have walked with this transmission from the first crack in the coherence field to this exact edge of decision. You have watched yourself, almost from above, moving through old reactions, new choices, strange in-between spaces where the ground felt like it was dissolving beneath you. And now you know something you can never unknow. You are not the default. You are not the sum of your conditioning, your family story, your cultural script, or your past mistakes stabilized over time. You are the observer who can reassign meaning, redirect energy, and reconfigure the path your life traces through the quantum field. That realization is not a feeling, it is a responsibility. Because once you see that your agreement is the currency that powers a timeline, you can no longer claim you are powerless inside it. You may feel afraid, you may feel under-resourced, you may feel unsure of the how. But beneath all of that, every time I choose coherence over self-betrayal, I invest in a different reality. So this is the moment where the initiation becomes a commitment. Not a grand, cinematic oath, but a simple internal orientation. I will not go back to sleep on purpose. You will still get tired. You will still forget, collapse, reenact old patterns. You are human, but you will no longer call that sleep who I am. You will recognize it as a temporary loss of signal, and you will know how to return. Breath, sensation, honesty, one aligned action that belongs to the timeline you are choosing now. You are not asked to become perfect. You are asked to become loyal to the you who is emerging. Loyal enough to disappoint those who only loved the version of you that lived in the default timeline. Loyal enough to be misunderstood by those who cannot yet feel the field you are aligning with. Loyal enough to let entire seasons of your life fall away if they cannot cross this threshold with you. In return, reality gives you something the default timeline could never offer: congruence. More mornings where you wake with the quiet sense that your inner world and outer life are moving in the same direction. More nights where you go to sleep not numbed, not triumphant, just at peace with the fact that you did not abandon yourself today. More days where synchronicity stops being a rare event and becomes the background hum of a life lived in dialogue with the field. And you do not walk alone. Even if the people immediately around you are still deep in the default script, there are others across cities, countries, continents who are feeling the same rupture, the same refusal, the same restless knowing that this cannot be all we are here to experience. Each of you, in your own rooms, making your own small, defiant choices, are weaving a different grid across the planet. A grid of humans whose nervous systems are learning to host more truth than fear. A grid of observers who understand that timelines are not punishments or rewards, but ecosystems, shaped by what we repeatedly embody. A grid of consciousnesses who have remembered that prophecy is not something that happens to them, it is something that happens through them. So take one breath now, exactly where you are. Feel the weight of your body, the aliveness in your chest, the subtle electricity in your hands. Feel the version of you who lived entirely inside the default human timeline, the one who didn't know they had a choice, and honor them. They survived long enough for you to get here. Then, with whatever steadiness you can muster, say inwardly, I step out of the default human timeline. I choose a reality that matches my consciousness. I agree to remember, even when forgetting is easier. The field hears you. From this night onward, your life will keep giving you opportunities to prove that those words are true. Not to some distant authority, but to yourself. And every time you do, you step a little further into the non-default, into the reality where your presence is not an accidental byproduct of a random universe, but a precise contribution to a planet learning to wake up from within. If this reached you tonight, it is because you were ready. Now, you are responsible for what you do with that readiness. And the timeline that has been waiting beyond the edges of your old life is already turning its face toward you, adjusting its probabilities, making space for the human who finally remembered they were never meant to be default.